Capital Farm Credit Wednesday night podcast, our weekly look at the area athletic scene, what happened last week and what's going on this week. I'm here via Zoom with my partner, Dan Youngblood. And Dan, tonight we're going to talk about two things. My battle with COVID that is ongoing. We'll let the people know how I've been doing. And we're going to talk about our All Big Country Preps teams, which were released on Saturday.
Yeah. Obviously, we're glad to have you back. It's good to see you. Glad to hear you sounding like your old self. I know it's been a rough go for you, but it's good to see you kind of working your way back. So just, I guess let's just start from the beginning. I know a lot of people have been keeping up with how you're doing. Just kind of give us a status update.
Well, I was diagnosed on December the 28th, and the struggle with this stuff is just ongoing. I have against COVID, I have, I would say, progressed slowly but surely. I think I'm about 25% better than I was a couple of weeks ago. It's just been a frustrating, slow recovery. I've developed some side complications to go with that, which have made it even worse. But I am optimistic. I'm hopeful that I can be out at a basketball game here within the next week and a half or so. Let's hope that it works out that way. There's no guarantees. We'll just see. We'll just play it by ear and how it comes. I want to thank everybody. I heard from a lot of different people on Twitter and Facebook out there that sent me notes and messages and prayers and thoughts. And I owe every one of you a thank you. It was greatly appreciated, and it was very touching to hear from a lot of you. Some which were really surprising. A lot of you I don't even know. It was. I mean, I thank all of you. My wife and I both thank you a great deal.
And your situation's a little unique in that remember back in March you were hospitalized for about a week with pneumonia. We thought at that time it was probably COVID, and now you're having gone through it again. You're fairly convinced that's the case.
Yeah. A year ago, I didn't have an official diagnosis because they weren't having testing yet here in the Abilene area. But I am absolutely convinced that this is the second time that I've had this crap, if I can say that, because the symptoms are absolutely identical. Only the first time I fell into pneumonia, so it was, you could say it was maybe even worse. But yes, I'm convinced. I have no verification, but I'm absolutely convinced that this is the second time that I've had COVID. You can get it twice.
Yeah, and we're glad to hear that you are working your way back. I know that you and I have been in some communication, and I know it got pretty scary, touch and go there for a little while. So welcome back to at least this far, and we look forward to getting you out to some games. I know that big country basketball is not quite the same without you on the sidelines. So
I want to get out there. Believe me, I am really sick of being indoors. I want to get out and say hello and meet some people and cover games again. I want to get out. I'm hopeful that maybe within the next 10 days or so, I can do this. We'll see. But
and kind of shifting gears a little bit, you were able to help with our All Big Country Preps football team with doing your annual True Grit team, which turned out really well, I thought, again. And before we even start talking about this topic, I just want to you thanked everyone for the messages you got. I want to thank all of our coaches for the cooperation and the participation that they took part in our teams. Our ballot ended up, I think, being something like somewhere between 18 and 21 pages on a Word document full of kids that were nominated for our teams.
Yes.
And we really appreciate that. We want this to be something that everyone's involved in. We want everyone to have an opportunity to make it onto our ballot. And it was a tough process because I had to do probably a little bit more of it this year than I usually do. But it was really neat to see that level of participation and to get that many kids' names in there. That's something that's really important to both you and I.
Yeah, a very big, huge, special thank you to all you football coaches out there and volleyball coaches who have participated in this. Without your cooperation, Big Country Preps cannot be. It cannot exist without coaches' cooperation. And the amount of effort that they have put forward to get their kids some recognition is something that we can't thank them enough for.
And you mentioned volleyball. Our All Big Country Preps volleyball teams, the first of its kind, will be coming out this weekend on Saturday. So you have that to look forward to. We just got finished with football, which I thought turned out really well. I was really proud of what we put out. Just a ton of names on there. We went through 3 teams again this year, and just a ton of great players to honor. There were a lot of great players who were on our honorable mention team. So if you ended up or your son ended up on the honorable mention team, that's because he had a really, really strong season. It's just such a strong field anytime you're talking about this area with as many teams as we cover, that it's hard to make it on those lists. And those who do, really earned it. And those who don't were still great players.
It's a lot of work putting that thing together. And I owe you a thank you, because I've been thrown for a loop with this illness, and you really stepped up and did the bulk of the work on this when I was unable to assist you within the way I would normally assist you. And so a special thanks to you, Dan, for stepping up to the plate, man, because I wasn't there for you.
Yeah, obviously that's no problem at all. It's one of the things that we try to do here is look out for each other. I know that we both have a great deal of respect and care for each other. So I'm just glad, like I said before, to see you doing better. I know that you and I have texted back and forth, but we really haven't gotten to see each other even on Zoom much, just because of given the way you felt. So it's nice to see your face again, to get to talk to you a little bit, and to be talking about football.
It's been a while. It's been a while. It's good to see this face. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Look at this.
Yeah, I know. You got a nice beard.
You're like a mountain man.
Yeah, although I can relate to that. I did not shave the 2 weeks I was in COVID quarantine, and of course I look like that now too. But yeah, so I don't blame you for not pulling out the razor. Yeah,
I've gone Grizzly Adams here, so I don't know. So that's a side effect of COVID, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe.
But, okay, before we move any further into this week's show, it's time to thank our primary sponsor, Capital Farm Credit, with offices all over Texas, including Stamford and Abilene. Buy your own slice of Texas with Capital Farm Credit. Together, we're better. And with that, it's time to delve a little bit more into our 2020 All Big Country Preps football team. We released that team, all three teams, on Saturday, along with the superlatives and the True Grit team. Let's go over the superlatives. Let's talk about our MVPs, Dan. And we had some really special players, as always.
Yeah, and that's always a really difficult process to narrow that down, because like you said, we've always have so many really good players, really high-quality guys that have just done some really tremendous things. This year, you'll kind of notice it's a little bit of a Jim Ned feel to it. There are quite a few Jim Ned entries on there, but as they say, to the victors go the spoils. And when you win a state championship, that's kind of what happens. But we'll start with the overall player of the year. And this one, to me, was kind of a no-brainer just based on how many different areas of the football game that he impacted, and that is Xavier Wishart from Jim Ned, the running back, linebacker, kick returner, you name it. He was excellent in all of those roles. I don't think anyone's going to really quibble with that one. Just when you talk about not only the numbers, he ran for over 2,300 yards. He had over 100 tackles from his linebacker spot. Ran back 2 kickoffs for touchdowns. So I don't think anybody will quibble with that one, because the numbers are there. But when you talk also about the impact that he had on that run to the state championship, a pretty tremendous season for that junior.
What a ball player, and a guy that can do it all. Special teams, good running back. And he's an underrated defender. That kid can tackle and get to the point of attack with the best of them. An outstanding football player all around, and he's coming back for another year.
Yeah, that's the part that's crazy, is that he will be back. And moving forward, we're going to our offensive MVP. This is another one that I think people probably were able to predict, and that is Eastland quarterback Baron Morton, future Texas Tech Red Raider. Has had a tremendous career, a 4-year, at least a part-time starter now for 4 years at Eastland. And he put together his best year ever there this year, completing about 65% of his passes for more than 3,600 yards with a crazy 37-6 touchdown interception ratio. And I think the thing that made him even more special this year than he had been in the past is he punished defenses even more, and that he added a running element to his game. He's always been pretty mobile. This year he became an actual runner out of that quarterback position, had over 800 yards and a bunch more touchdowns. So just a tremendous player, and another one that I don't think too many people will argue with that one.
First time I saw him was as a freshman, and I didn't get a really good look at him because he was splitting time as a freshman. And then all of a sudden you hear he's going to Texas Tech before his sophomore season. And I was like, what? And I went out there to a practice prior to the season, prior to his sophomore year, thinking, okay, let's see what you got, kid. And I watched about 4 or 5 snaps, and I'm like, yeah, this kid's a cut above. And you could just see it. And it didn't take a trained eye to see it. He was that good, and from an early age.
And that's one thing. The first time I ever saw him live was a playoff game his junior year. And it's the same thing. The ball just comes out of his hand different. I mean, he has such a strong arm. But it was interesting talking to his dad and Coach James Morton. Is he said probably the most fun part of coaching his son for those 4 years was seeing him kind of graduate from just a guy who thought he was there to throw the football to being a guy who saw the whole picture, to being a guy who understood that it was about, getting close to your teammates, building a team, and learning all of the lessons you're supposed to learn along the way. And he said that was probably the thing he was most proud of. And obviously, I'm sure he enjoyed watching his son accomplish the things he did on the football field, but he said he was most proud of just kind of him grasping that bigger picture and moving forward that way. But a huge career, a huge year. And so Baron Morton is our offensive MVP. And that brings us to our defensive MVP, which comes from Brock, which is obviously another one of our really strong programs. Spent most of the year as the number 1 ranked team in Class 3A Division I before being knocked off by Jim Ned in the 3rd round. And our defensive MVP is safety Luke Dillingham, a 3-year starter for the Eagles, which doesn't happen very often. And even less often, he was a 2-year captain, which Coach Worrell told me has only happened twice. So Dillingham is one of just 2-year captains for the Brock Eagles in the history of their football program. So a guy that was just a tremendous player, made a massive impact. And one of the things that Coach Worrell told me that he said that kind of made him, he thought, even more special is that if he wanted to, he could have been one of their better offensive players too. But he was able to kind of focus on defense and really maximize his effort there. And he was part of a fantastic Brock defense.
Okay, and he finished with 120 tackles and 5 picks. And a lot of people tell you, anytime you got a guy in the secondary making 120 tackles, that's indicative of problems defensively. That's not the case at Brock. At Brock, it's more indicative of them getting in the gaps and occupying blockers so the guys behind that front can make a bunch of stops. And that's really how that Brock defense works.
Yeah, that free safety position for that Brock team is really, really important. So for Dillingham to have held that down for 3 years, and not just to have done that, but excelled. He finished his career the last 3 years with 384 tackles in addition to 11 interceptions. So this is a guy who is an absolute playmaker. He'll be continuing his career at ACU. And Coach Worrell tells me that he thinks he's a steal. He said he thinks that's a Power 5 talent that's going to be playing for ACU. So that's a big get for them. A great kid, a great player, and I think a very worthy defensive MVP for us.
Yeah, one thing I want to say before we move on is how much class Brock conducted itself with. I think we saw it in that upset loss to really eventual state champion Jim Ned. So if you want to call that an upset, fine. But Brock came in as a favorite. They came in ranked number 1. And they just got beat that day. And there was a lot of room for frustration. They could have been very frustrated. We could have seen cheap shots. We could have seen, kids acting without class, et cetera. I saw nothing but class from the Brock Eagles. People give Brock a hard time because they're successful. But I'll tell you what, that is a Class E program, Dan. Their coach has class. Their kids have class. And if you beat them, you know what? They'll shake your hand and say, hey, you beat us today. We'll get you tomorrow.
No, and you saw this year what I saw the last 2 years, because I saw their state semifinals losses each of the last 2 years. And in all 3 of those cases, you're talking about really hard-fought, heartbreaking losses. And it was the same thing. Kids stood up there, kept their chin up. Coach Worrell comes to you. He answers your questions. There's no pouting, no whining. They understand, and they were disappointed. This team thought it had a state championship ceiling, and there's a very good chance that had they knocked off Jim Ned that day, that they would have gotten to hoist the trophy at the end of the season. So a tough loss, but I agree with you. I think that's a program that is run really, really well, a classy coach at the top of it, and that tends to trickle down. So a class program, and that's the same with Jim Ned, which brings us to our special teams player of the year, another Indian, Zach Henderson, a kid who was their leading receiver. He was one of their top defensive backs, another one of those guys, and you're going to hear this a lot from Jim Ned players, a guy who's just an all-around really good talent and an all-around really unselfish guy. He's a guy that Coach Matt Fanning said if in another system he could have been an 800, 900, 1,000-yard receiver. In this system, he's about a 500-yard receiver, but he makes huge plays, and you saw that in the state championship game. Yeah,
and really the most interesting thing about him is not only was he, on JV 3-4 years ago, but he was on the JVC team. He wasn't one of the top line players in the Jim Ned program. He was on the JVC team. So, as a freshman, early sophomore, really not much was expected of him. And then all of a sudden, he just exploded and became one of the better players in the area.
Yeah, and that started last year where he kind of showed that playmaking ability, both as a receiver and a DB. And this year he did the same thing and really showed it on the special teams, which is where he was honored by us, his ability to return kicks. It's funny, he was lined up across from Xavier Wishart, and a lot of guys like, we're not kicking to him, so they kick to Zach, and Zach takes 2 back and says, you can't kick to me either. So yeah. that team, special teams, played a major role in what Jim Ned did this year, and Zach Henderson was a big player, and he was a big reason for that.
With that, Dan, we're going to move on to our offensive newcomer of the year. No surprise, Tate Yardley takes that award.
Yeah, another Gym Net Indian and another well-deserving kid and another unselfish kid. That's the thing. You're starting to see a pattern develop, and that's what you kind of see. Programs that achieve at that level have a bunch of kids who are team-oriented guys who do what's asked of them and nothing more, and who are willing and enjoy sharing that success with their teammates. And Tate Yardley is absolutely that kind of guy, a winner in every sense of the term.
Never lost a JV start.
Yeah, never lost a JV start.
Never lost a JV start.
Yeah, he had never lost a sub-varsity start, period. 7th, 8th grade on. Yeah. He loses his first varsity start at Ballinger game that you were at, and from there rattles off 14 straight wins in a state championship, doing something that even Colt McCoy couldn't do at Gym Ned. So Tate Yardley was a shining star for them this year as a junior.
Well, that shows how good Ballinger really was at the early part of the year when they were fully healthy.
Yeah,
good ball club. Good ball club.
Yeah, the interesting thing with Yardley, he threw for just over 1,900 yards, which is not an overwhelming total, but he was another one that he wasn't asked necessarily to go out and air the ball out, but when he needed to make plays, he made plays. He ran that offense really, really well. And again, as was the case with Henderson, who could have been a 1,000-yard receiver, Yardley could easily have been a 3,000-yard passer if their offense called for that, but it didn't. So he was doing what their offense called for and did it really, really well. And you saw in that state championship game, he made a couple of plays that absolutely helped them win the game. It wasn't just a game manager situation. It was him making plays. So he's another one that's going to be back next year. It's going to be really exciting to see him and Wishart in that same backfield again.
He could have thrown for a ton of yards if that were their style. But, Coach Fanning is a guy that, if he's got a big offensive line and a good back behind him, he's going to just hit you in the face, and that's their style. That's his style, and it wins, and they won a state championship with it. But had he been a spread the field guy, let's throw it all over the place, Yardley could have had a ton of yardage with his boys and the targets he's had to throw to. Absolutely.
Yeah, just a tremendous season by Tate Yardley, who, again, we're going to get to see again next year with Wishart in that backfield. And I know that they're already talking about trying to defend that state championship. So it's been an exciting time there for sure. All right, and that takes us into our defensive newcomer of the year, which is a local kid, a sophomore safety, Noah Hatcher from Abilene High, a guy who really had started the year as a running back. Primarily, that's where they were looking at him. Coach Mike Fullen decided we need to add a little bit of athleticism to our defensive secondary. Let's give him a look over there. He starts from the beginning and really never gives that position up. A kid that very athletic, very high football IQ, a playmaker. Did a lot of really special things this year, 46 tackles going into their final game of the season. Kind of a playmaker, forced some turnovers, did some big things that way. But a kid who showed a tremendous future. And Coach Mike Fullen says he's still raw. He said he's still going to improve a lot. And Fullen expects him to be one of the best safeties they've had in his time there by the time he leaves.
Well, most coaches, and with good reason, get nervous about starting a sophomore defensively, especially at the 5A level. But you got to love it when you got a sophomore out there who forces 5 turnovers on the season. He forced 3 fumbles. He had a couple of picks, and including a game-saving pick against Odessa Permian early in the year.
Yeah, that was a huge pick. It's good you mentioned that. That was a massive play for not only him but for Abilene High, because that was their only win in their first 4 games. That kind of got them going a little bit, and then they end up rattling off a win streak to end the season, get to the 3rd round of the playoffs. But I think it really started with that Permian game. And in that game, they're holding on to a narrow lead because of a fumble that gives Permian one last chance. Permian drives it all the way down, and Hatcher makes a fantastic play running across the field to get a pick in the end zone in the final minute that allows them to kneel the rest of the way out. But this is a kid that Coach Fullen is really excited about. He has 2 more years with him. And it was kind of funny. He mentioned Colton Wilson, who's another one of those kids that started from a young age, freshman, sophomore, and ended up playing there for 3 or 4 years. And Coach Fullen said that Colton Wilson was one of those that he felt like was there for 10 years. And he said he's looking forward to having Hatcher be one of those players too, that people kind of remember, how long has that kid been there? So he's a good one. He's a really good one. And he's got a really bright future for Abilene High. And then that rounding out our superlative awards go to the coach of the year. And I don't think there's a whole lot of mystery here. We've already mentioned his name several times. Yeah. Think about that one for a little bit. Matt Fanning of Gym Ned. Frankly, just think about this. If I had told you 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that anyone would be leaving Gym Ned to a state championship game, what would your response have been?
Well, they're a good basketball team. That's why they won the state championship. That would have been my response.
That's true.
But, let's face it. Let's face it. 10 years ago, when everybody brought up Gym Ned, you thought of 2 things really quickly. You thought, cross country may have come to mind. But you would have been thinking, boys and girls basketball. You'd have thought, baseball.
Maybe
Both
tennis.
of those programs have had a lot of success. But at that point, the Colt McCoy era was considered a bygone era, and Jim Ned was generally looked at as a basketball, baseball school, not football. They were more of a finesse team, football-wise, and you can win as a finesse team, but that was their reputation, being more of a finesse team, and they weren't real successful with it. All of a sudden, they have become, I'll tell you what, if you had told me that Jim Ned would not only win a state championship, but would do so by playing smash mouth football, if they would smash mouth all the way to Arlington, I would have said, what are you drinking? I would have said, what are you drinking? But it happened. That is who they have become. That is what the Jim Ned Indians are.
And it happened because he won't take all the credit for it, and he shouldn't. There were a lot of people involved in this, obviously. But it happened because Coach Matt Fanning believed it could happen, and he coached them in a way where that was the expectation. The expectation was for you to be the toughest team on the field, for you to be the best executing team on the football field, and for you to have fun while you're doing it. But you're there to show these people what you're capable of, and that you're capable of playing at a high level, and they were. And that's the thing that struck me so much about this team, and we've talked about it before, about kind of that team taking on the identity of their coach, was just how tough-minded this team was. This team had a lot of opportunities this year. They played about as tough a schedule as you're ever going to play at the Class 3A Division I level. They played Hallettsville twice. They played Brock. They played Cisco. They played Eastland. They played Wall. You're talking about some really heavy hitters on the way to their state championship. Yes. And B, yes, in a lot of those different games, they were in situations where they had to make plays to win, and they had to make plays late because they were down, and they had to make plays to win. So they trailed to a narrow lead.
They trailed at Cisco in the second half and came back. That's not easy to do.
Yeah, or in both the game against Mount Vernon and the game against Hallettsville, the semifinal and the state championship game, they're punting to the opposition, needing to make a stop to save the game, and in both cases they're able to do so. Or in the Hallettsville game, it sent it to overtime. In the Mount Vernon game, you won it that way. But this team just so tough, so mentally tough, and it was really fun to watch. And Matt Fanning deserves a ton of credit for it. One thing that was neat was I was at Abilene High's second-round playoff game, and I saw Coach Jared Womack.
Yes, glad you mentioned him because I was about to.
And I did that. I shook his hand. I said, "Hey, did you watch the game?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "You helped start that." And he said, "Well, they finished it." So I know that Coach Fanning was on Coach Womack's staff. Coach Womack got that belief, kind of got the wheels turning, and Coach Fanning deserves a ton of credit for taking that baton and getting them to the finish line.
Absolutely. And Coach Fanning would want you to mention Jared Womack. He would want you to mention it. Coach Womack is the guy who really got the ball rolling at Jim Ned. He changed the culture. He deserves credit for that. Coach Womack changed the football culture at Jim Ned and started building that confidence, started changing that attitude. And all of a sudden, some athletes start coming into the picture, and Fanning takes over, changes the mentality a little bit to more to his personality, more of the smash mouth type. They had the tools to do it, and he finished the job. And here we are, Jim Ned state champs.
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of both those guys. First of all, I love Coach Womack, but I love Coach Fanning. I've really enjoyed getting to know him and get to know what he's about. I mean, he's got such kind of that gruff, kind of quiet exterior, but he's a guy who loves having fun. And this team was able to pull that out of him, which I thought was really cool too. Is this team was able to kind of get that aspect of his personality out there. You got to see that, and he told me this was one of the most enjoyable runs he's ever had in sports ever, and I can understand why. So just a tremendous job of coaching, a tremendous run by a tremendous team. I don't think anyone will be forgetting about this Jim Ned group anytime soon.
No. And Coach Fanning's a great guy, and Coach Womack's a great guy. Both of them are. If you watch the Jim Ned football team following a game, win or lose, and listen to Coach Fanning speak to them, and I was there for a number of those games to listen to him talk to his team and listen to how they focus in on him. It's a laser focus. They listen to every syllable that guy says. They respect him. And he gets them up, man. He gets them believing. He had them believing that they could beat anybody on that slate, especially down the home stretch. It was a tough task to convince those kids that they could beat Brock. They were a big dog going into that game, but they showed up believing that they could win.
You know, it's funny. I asked him kind of when he thought that this team maybe had that type of ceiling, like a state championship ceiling. He said, "Well, I'm such a one game at a time guy that he really didn't kind of think that way." He said there were two occasions when it kind of started coming, you know, that kind of came clear. The first one was when they beat Wall the way they did, to basically clinch their first district championship since Colt McCoy was there. He said that one kind of was the indicator. And he said the second one came 10 minutes into the Brock game when he was like, we can play with these guys. and I guess if you figure if you can play with Brock, you can play with anybody. So, but he said at that point, he was like, I think we can do some pretty special things.
I mean, that's what it dawned on me. I mean, I knew they were good, but when they just flat out beat Brock, and they did, they flat out beat Brock that day, I was thinking, we might just be going to Jerry World with this bunch. These guys are very good.
Yeah. And one thing he said as well, he kind of credited the fact that this team was able to have fun. He said this team had fun even in the adverse moments. So like they were able to kind of, even when they were down close or needed a score or needed to hold on to needed to hold off the offense to save a 1-score lead, that team was having fun the entire time. They just had fun competing. And I think that's a big key. I think when you have a program that just enjoys getting out there competing with each other, you're going to do a lot of really special things. And this team, I mean, this was the absolute quintessential team. I mean, this team, it was such a good, just a really close-knit family type atmosphere. And it's good to see those types of teams and those types of programs succeed. And obviously it was really fun watching Jim Ned do what they did.
Absolutely. And I think in fairness, I think it's accurate to say that we had in our coverage area, we had the two best teams in the state, and Jim Ned and Brock. At the 3AD1 level. Those are the two best teams in the state.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think those were the two best. Hallettsville is obviously very good as well. They played Jim Ned within 1 score twice. But yeah, as far as a complete team, both sides of the football, I agree with you. I think Jim Ned and Brock were the two best.
And we're gonna move on into our first team, All Big Country Preps team next. But before we do that, we want to thank some of our sponsors, beginning, of course, with Capital Farm Credit, who brings you these Wednesday night podcasts free of charge throughout the school year. Also, for the love of the game, broadcasting, our old friend Terry Slavens, owner of K-Lakes 93.5 FM out of Breck, 97.7 KATX FM out of Eastland, Classic Country AM 1330 out of Graham, 94.7 FM KWKQ FM out of Graham, KROO 1430 AM out of Breck, and KWBY 98.5 FM out of Ranger. That is for the love of the game broadcasting. Also, Phil Hill of the Abilene Realtors Group, big supporter of local athletics. If you're in the market, give Phil a call at 325-669-5153 or visit his website at philhillproperties.com. And finally, Jack's Road Boring and Snyder, dirt sales and services with service and experience that you can count on. Larry Green is the man to call out there. Give him a shout at 325-575-8004. That's Jack's Road Boring and Snyder. And with that, Dan, it is time to jump into the All Big Country Preps first team football roster. Let's go ahead and begin. We got obviously right there at the quarterback position, we've got Baron Morton threw for 3,613 yards, hit 68% of his throws. Kid deserved it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, again, what may be the most impressive is we knew he could throw the football. He ran for almost 900 yards and 19 more touchdowns this year, which that was something he added to his game. That was not something he did a whole lot before. So really became a dual-threat quarterback, had a monster year, led Eastland on a 10-game winning streak after kind of a tumultuous start, got them to the region championship game. A huge year for Barron, a well-deserving spot on that first team.
Okay, now let's just jump into the backfield. We've got, no surprise here, we've got Xavier Wishart of Jim Ned. We've got Cash Jones of Brock occupying the backfield. Dan Wishart rushed for 2,330 yards. He had 33 touchdowns. Cash Jones, 2,394 yards. Again, 33 touchdowns. Both of these guys are studs.
Yeah, they both are. And to get onto the first team, they had to beat a couple of other studs because you had Ethan Sanchez from Bangs, who's obviously an 1,800-yard back who had a monster season for the Dragons. And then you had Noah Garcia at Cooper, who was one of the area's all-time leading rushers. So a kid that just for these two kids to get those spots on that first team, and I think very deservingly so, speaks a lot to the seasons they had. Both rushed for over 2,300 yards. Both had identical touchdown totals with 33 each on the ground. I mean, those two guys had monstrous seasons and led their teams to fantastic seasons. And like you said before, either one of those guys could have ended up a state champion. Xavier Wishart did.
All right, let's jump out to the perimeter, the wide receivers. We got Darian Carr from Sweetwater. This guy was a weapon, Dan. Topped the 1,000-yard mark in receiving. Caught 45 passes for 19 touchdowns.
Yeah, we had Carr had the monster season. Then below him on the first team, you had Peyton McLean from Eastland, who was the area's leading receiver with 1,275 yards. He had 15 touchdowns, that on 81 catches. And then Trace Morrison, the only other 1,000-yard receiver in the area from Stephenville. He is our third first-team selection at receiver. He had 1,008 yards and 11 touchdowns for the Yellow Jackets on 59 receptions. All three of these guys had great seasons. These were the only 3,000-yard receivers in the area, and I think all three of them were well deserving of that honor.
Okay, let's move up front to the offensive linemen. Am I wrong in saying that this might be one of the best years for offensive linemen that we've had in the Big Country in a while?
Yeah, I think you can make a case, a very strong case for that fact. I think if you look at any one of the offensive lines on any of our first three teams, there's not a whole lot of coaches in this state that wouldn't be happy to have those groups. But we'll start with the first team, and there you start the list with Tate Williams from Wall, a future Baylor Bear. I mean, this guy is just a road grader. He's huge at 6'4", 265 thereabouts, and graded out at 95%, had a monstrous 114 pancake blocks.
Yeah, this guy's the IHOP of offensive linemen, man.
This guy's an animal. He's a big, strong offensive lineman, really a guy who can clear holes, just a great lineman. I'm looking forward to seeing what he does at Baylor, being a Baylor grad myself. And moving on, we had Colter Denson, a member of that really strong offensive line at Jim Ned, 5'10", 230 senior for the Indians, had a phenomenal season from their center position, 98% blocking success rate, 61 knockdowns. He was a big part of the success they had, a guy who touched the ball on every play for them, a very, very deserving player there on our first team.
Okay, let's move out to Brock. We've got Kayden Matthews of Brock, 121 pancakes for a ball club that averaged 529 yards in total offense and 54 points per game. Graded out at 96% blocking efficiency, another stud. And he did all that weighing only 215 pounds. That's not the biggest offensive lineman on the block.
No, I was gonna mention that he was the smallest offensive lineman on our first team list, but a guy that clearly knows how to use the weight he has, does a great job for Brock. That takes us to Adam Nguyen, who's probably a familiar name for Big Country football fans. This is a guy who's been a two-way all-state player for a couple of years now. This guy's a fantastic offensive lineman for Ballinger, two-way lineman. He also stars on the D-line. This year he had 32 pancakes, 26 knockdown, 23 downfield blocks, grading out at 95% for a 10-2 Bearcat team. And that was despite missing a little bit of time early in the season with some injury issues. So another very well-deserving member of that first team. And that we wrap up our first-team offensive line with a newcomer to the area, and that is Cooper's Hagen Davila, a kid who came to them from Odessa Permian and really ingratiated himself well, had a fantastic season for the 7-2 Cougs, 93% grade out, 48 knockdowns. And he was really a godsend for that offense. They had lost pretty much all of their offensive line production from the year before. They only had one returning starter from a really good unit. Davila comes, helps lead that group, and they really didn't drop off a whole lot. So I think this group of offensive line, I agree with you. These are five really strong offensive linemen, and that list goes well beyond that into the second team, third team, and even under their honorable mention.
All right, we're going to jump into our utilities. And, Dan, I've always had an affinity for these type guys. These guys that might be a little undersized here or there or whatever, but they're tough enough and sharp enough to play a variety of different positions, and you kind of plug them in where you need them. I think those guys, if you have a couple of guys like that on your roster, that's invaluable.
And we start that with a guy who really only played one position this year, but he proved his utility in the past. He had been a receiver at Stephenville for most of his career. They needed a quarterback. Gavin Roundtree from Stephenville steps into that spot, has a fantastic year as a quarterback, throws for over 2,800 yards with a 24-9 touchdown interception ratio, rushes for 700 yards and 12 more touchdowns. A guy who came into the year in a quarterback battle after being really one of the area's top receivers, and then he goes shows he can be one of the area's top quarterbacks too. So, I mean, he's one of those kids you got to find a spot for because he absolutely deserves it.
Okay, now let's shift out to Brock, another quality utility. Chris Powell, Freeman, only a sophomore. Dan rushed for 700 yards and received for more than 500 and scored 14 touchdowns. Anytime a sophomore can do that for you, you got to feel pretty good.
Yeah, this is a kid who got a little bit of playing time at the end of last year. He got called up from JV and got to play during their playoff run, which Brock does a lot with a lot of those kids. And he showed that he's got some explosion to his game. And this year they kind of invented a position for him. He was kind of a hybrid running back receiver position, but he's such a good athlete and such a good playmaker that Coach Worrell wanted to find a way to get him involved in the game, and they did. They used him a lot as a receiver. He ran the ball well. He's just a weapon, and like you said, only a sophomore, so he's got big, big things ahead of him.
All right, now let's shift over to Anson, another quality utility, Dylan Pyle, who filled in quite a bit at quarterback out there for the Tigers. He didn't start the season at quarterback. He filled in because of injury and actually ended up throwing 505 yards and 4 scores, and then switched back to wide receiver when they started getting healthy, rushed for over 300, scored another couple touchdowns there. This is a guy that can do anything for you.
Yeah, they had some quarterback issues, and they put him in that spot, and he really did a good job. But Coach Hagler decided that they really needed his speed and athleticism more on the edges, and they move him up there, and he goes and has a monster season in really any capacity you put him in. He passed for over 500 yards. He rushed for over 300. He received for over 500 and was, a playmaker in all 3 capacities. So a kid that was a really special talent for Anson, and he was a big part of what they did. That was a team that relied a lot on its speed on the edges, and Pyle was a huge part of that.
All right, let's move out to special teams. Our place kicker is Anthony Ramirez from Abilene High School. Had a great year, Dan.
Yeah, Anthony Ramirez was a big player for them as a junior. He played some receiver for them as well. He makes it on our team as the kicker. Very reliable. He pretty much automatic on PATs, made all 6 of his field goal attempts. You can't say a whole lot more than that. I mean, he's a guy that when they needed him to make a kick, he went out there and did it in some big situations. So, yeah, a very nice weapon for Coach Fullen to have, and they're going to get to enjoy him again next year.
And with that, we're going to jump into our first team defense. And right up here at the top of the list, we'll start at the defensive line. And right at the top of the list, no surprise, we've got Brett Dralette from Brock. It's you can almost always count on somebody in the front 7 and out of Brock's defense getting postseason honors, Dan. And this year, Brett Dralette is one of our defensive line starters.
Yeah, you're right. That's a team that has had a whole lot of success, particularly from that defensive end position, which is the one that Brett Dralette occupies. He had a big season for Brock this year, 73 tackles, 14 tackles for loss, 8 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries. Really to help one of the best defenses in this area. That Brock defense held its opponents to 14.7 points per game this year, and that was a big part of the reason that they were able to hold down that number 1 spot basically the entirety of the regular season, and really were the favorite going into the playoffs. So he was a big part of that team. He's headed to Louisiana Monroe to play collegiately. This is a kid that showed an enormous amount of improvement his last 2 years, and those are the types of success stories you see quite a bit out of Brock.
All right, let's move along to Jim Ned's Austin Martin. And I'm going to just throw this out. Dude had 96 tackles. This is up front, okay? He had 96 tackles, but 62 solo tackles off the defensive line that's ridiculous. That's so good.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. That's
domination,
man.
Yeah, and if you look at those Jim Ned players' stats, you're not talking about inflated tackle totals either. I mean, sometimes you'll see these tackle totals that you kind of question just a little bit about what is considered an assist or those sorts of things. These are legit tackles he's getting, and to have 96 tackles, 62 solos from a defensive line position tells you just how good he is. And another indicator there is he's always in the backfield. 24.5 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks, 25 quarterback hurries. I mean, this guy, he's a disruptive force.
That's sicker than me, and I'm sick.
Yeah,
I'm really sick. 24.5 tackles for loss? Yeah. That is sick.
You know, he is a disruptive force. And an interesting thing about Austin Martin, too, and we're probably not going to get we'll let the folks, the viewers here read our second team and third team. You'll see that Austin Martin also made it as a tight end on the third team. So he was a kid that was really a two-way standout for that team, an outstanding physical player, kind of a blue-collar player that kind of exemplified what they're about, very physical, very hard-nosed. And I think he showed it with the defensive stats that earned him his spot on this team.
All right, now we're going to move on to Ethan Byerly of Hamlin, one of the best defensive linemen we've had over the last 2 or 3 years, Dan. And I like to refer to him as the Chuck Bednarik of the big country. This kid can play both ways, and he's old school. I mean, he'll walk off the field with blood all over his face. He's that tough.
No, he is. He's a really tough kid, a great player. 92 tackles, 44 of those solos, 15 for loss, 5 sacks. And this was from a Hamlin defense that was allowing 8.7 points per game and was blowing out most of its opponents early in the season. So he wasn't playing 4 quarters a lot of games. So you're talking about a kid that was just an outstanding player for multiple years, helped them get to the state championship game 2 years ago, might have done the same this year had they not had some injury issues. So
there's another thing to consider too. There's another thing to consider. Sorry to interrupt you, but this year he was drawing the double teams.
That's true.
Yeah, he had those numbers, and that's the guy that he was the focus of offensive lines this year and drawing most of the double teams. And he still had great numbers.
That's a really good point because he didn't have Austin Lozano beside him this year to draw a lot of that. So this was he was getting more attention this year and still managed to be district's 5-2A overall MVP from a 2A line position. That tells you the respect that he was getting from the coaches in that league, that they knew what kind of player he was. And that takes us to our final defensive lineman in our 4-down set. Dylan Wargle from Abilene High. He was one of very few defensive starters returning for the Eagles this year, one of just 3. And he came in and did a fantastic job. He played a major role in helping that team get to the 3rd round of the playoffs. His tackle totals aren't going to wow you because they run a 3-4 where his job is primarily to occupy blocks and to really open up holes and lanes for those linebackers behind him to go make plays. But 47 tackles, 4 for loss, 6 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, still very disruptive from a position where you don't necessarily see a whole lot of flashy numbers a lot of times.
All right, well, now we're going to shift over to the linebackers. No surprise, a Brock Eagle makes it. Carson Carter of Brock had a great year, 157 tackles. And again, that's indicative of Brock's aggression defensively and then getting into those gaps and letting the linebackers make plays. And that's what the Brock Eagles do. They're in your face defensively all the time. This kid, 157 tackles and 30 of them were for loss.
Yeah, no, he's another one of those guys that's just a disruptor, just a playmaker, sideline to sideline, can a really sure tackler. He shared the defensive MVP honors out of his district with Luke Dillingham. So that kind of tells you the type of player he is. That he's one of those that he could have been a candidate for our defensive MVP as well. So he just got narrowly edged out by his own teammate.
And forced 4 fumbles. Anytime a guy is forcing turnovers, that's a huge plus. Let's move on to Cisco, and really one of the better small school athletes we've got in the big country. He deserves to be here. A great athlete, Dawson Hearn of Cisco, a 6'4", 210-pound junior. And his injury, Dan, in that loss to Post really shifted that ball game. If Dawson Hearn does not get hurt in that ball game, Cisco was hanging with Post up until they lost Dawson. He was that important to him.
Yeah, and that hurt him on both sides of the ball, and that game kind of got away from him. But he's a guy that you mentioned, just a fantastic athlete. He's got a D1 body, 6'4", 210. He's about as physically gifted as any player you're going to find in our area, and he puts that talent to good work. 126 tackles on the year, 7 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, a fumble recovery, interception, 2 pass breakups. A guy who makes himself, valuable in a whole lot of different areas. And then he's another one of those guys that from his linebacker position was his district's MVP. So a very good football player that does a lot of things well.
All right. Now, Drew Morrison of the Wall Hawks is our final first-team linebacker. He had 112 tackles, 10 for loss. But the thing is, he had to occupy the quarterback position as well. This is a busy guy.
Yeah, early in the season especially, he was playing a whole lot of quarterback. And so he was, and that was in addition to his role as he's been the middle linebacker at Wall now this was his 3rd year as a starter. So a guy who they thought really highly of defensively, had to add new responsibilities to his list of roles this year, and still managed to have a big year for him. And that was a great Wall defense. They only allowed 14.9 points per game this year. So he was right in the middle of that, had a great year, and another one of those kids that we've heard that name for several years now, but he's one of those guys that there's a reason why you know his name. He's always in the middle of the action.
Okay, we're going to jump out to the secondary now, and we've got a Brock Eagle again. We've got a Brock Eagle at all 3 levels of our first-team defense. Luke Dillingham is a first-teamer out there, 120 tackles, 5 interceptions. Again, the people behind that front level of Brock, they get to make a lot of plays because of the aggression and effectiveness of Brock up front.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about Dillingham already as our defensive MVP, but I don't think you can talk too much about this kid. He and Carter are just such huge parts of that defense. Dralette up front with a couple of the other guys. They had an outstanding defensive line this year. And those guys made, like you said, opportunities 4 people like Carter, 4 people like Dillingham, and those guys made the most of them, just amassing really impressive tackle totals. And the thing that always has impressed me about Dillingham is that he's really good against the run, and that's indicative, and you can see that in his tackle totals. But he's also a really a ball hawk in the back of that defense. He's a guy who's had at least 5 interceptions in 2 of his varsity seasons. So a kid that really makes an impact in a lot of different ways.
All right, Bryce Hermsmeyer is our next first-team secondary member. He's 5'8", 145 pounds, but tough as nails, and really a pity this year because he missed much of the season due to injury. There's no telling what kind of an impact he could have had.
Yeah, I think that to me is the most impressive part about his inclusion here is that Bryce did all of his damage this year in 6 games because he had his season ended early due to injury, which, like you said, was really unfortunate. But he showed in those 6 games the type of player that he is: 20 tackles, 20 solo tackles, 13 assists, 3 tackles for loss. And here's where you see it. In 6 games, he had 5 interceptions and 8 pass breakups. That's pretty remarkable. That's a guy who is playing some really tight coverage there. If you're having in 6 games, 5 interceptions and 8 pass breakups.
All right, now we have spoken about Zach Henderson of Jim Net. He is a first-team secondary player as well. He's just as good as a wide receiver as he is a secondary player, in my opinion, but still gathered 44 tackles and 31 solos, 4 picks in the secondary.
Yeah, and 3 pass breakups to go with that as well. I mean, he's one of those guys that's just good at everything he does, and I think he's a remarkable story for the reason you mentioned earlier is that he's a guy that really had to work his way to this point, but an outstanding player, had a great senior season in which he was a contributor in all 3 phases, and then here for us, he is our first team, one of our first-team defensive backs.
All right, our last first-teamer in the secondary is Tavern Espinosa from Wall, 5'11", 175 pounds senior, 75 tackles this year, among other things.
Yeah, this is one of those kids who can really help, one of those safeties that's really good both in run support and as a pass defender. He had 75 tackles, like you mentioned, the heavy hitter, sure, physical type safety, but he also had 5 interceptions to go with that. So he was a guy that you couldn't that you couldn't necessarily beat over the top. So another one of those players that contributed a great deal to that Wall defense, which was very good this year. That was a very good defensive football team, and he again played a major role in that.
All right, let's jump into our defensive utilities. We'll start with Brandon Fielding of Eastland. Now, this guy, I'll let you talk about his defensive capability. As a running back, he was a beast. You know, he rushed for over 1,000 yards. He was a big physical guy, 225 pounds, and really was a nice counterweight to Morton there in the Eastland backfield.
Yeah, this is one of those guys that I kind of consider him a utility in that he does everything for them. You mentioned the job he does running the football. He's a really good receiver out of the backfield. But on defense is kind of the lesser known of his abilities. But he's also a really disruptive defensive lineman for the Mavericks. Had 68 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, and 17 quarterback hurries. So as a pass rusher, he was a really key part of what I thought toward the end of the year was an underrated Eastland defense. They had made tremendous strides during that 10-game winning streak to get better, which was really something they needed to do because early in the season they struggled. And I think that he played a pretty significant role in helping that defense get where it got as a senior and as a multi-year starter and as a leader for that program. So I wanted to get him included just because of the type of player he was. I thought he felt really fit really well there in that utility spot.
All right, now we go to local, Abilene High, Jaden Stuckey, a 6', 190-pound junior. I know you're pretty high on this guy's game, Dan.
Yeah, this is one of those multi-position guys, a guy who can play both linebacker and safety, and a guy who's really good in both positions. His versatility is really a weapon for Coach Mike Fullen in that defense, and I think he showed his ability this year with 75 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, a fumble recovery, an interception, and that did not include their final playoff game. So a kid who was also just a junior, so he'll be back. He's another one that's a 3-year varsity player, will be a 3-year varsity player for them next year, and a really special player with that versatility that he brings to the defense.
And finally, Kyron Deal of Brownwood is our final utility player on the defensive side. This is a guy, Dan, that he can tackle and he can force you some turnovers as well. Solid player.
Yeah, for sure. And that a lot of times that utility position is one we will use for that. When you don't have a whole lot of multi-position guys on that defensive side of the football, you look for guys who bring a lot to their team. And I think Kyron Deal is one of those guys. He's a big-time leader for that program on and off the field, a really good student. and a great player. He's a really good physical safety. He had 98 tackles, a tackle for loss, a forced fumble, an interception that he ran back for a touchdown. So he's a guy that made a pretty big impact for a Brownwood team that was led by its defense this year. They weren't as strong offensively as they've been in some years past. And he was a big-time player for him that really had contributed for multiple years to that program. So I was glad to be able to get him a spot on this team. So I thought he was well-deserving of it.
And finally, we'll shift out to the punter position, our final first-team position on our all-big country team. Trace Morrison of Stephenville takes that, Dan, and deservedly so, with a 42-yard average per punt.
Yeah, and this is a guy who's been in that role on our team for several years now. He's a huge-legged punter that is very, very consistent. You mentioned the 42-yard average. He has a long of 58 yards, 8 punts pinned inside the opponent's 20-yard line. And he's our only player on our first team that made first team at multiple positions. He was also a first-team receiver, just a fantastic player. He also plays safety for him. It rarely leaves the field for the Stephenville Yellow Jackets, but his punting average puts him pretty well head and shoulders above everyone else on our list, and that's why he's first team. So congratulations to our first team. All these guys, like I said before, are really good players, had great seasons, and are well-deserving, and congratulations to each of them.
And with that, it's just about time to wrap up the Capital Farm Credit Wednesday night podcast. But before we do that, we want to remind you that we have 3 subscription packages here at BigCountryPreps.com. We've got a monthly for $5 a month. We've got a semi-annual 6-month subscription where we knock that price down to $4 a month. And then we've got an annual where we knock the price down to $3 a month, 12 months, $36 for a full year of Big Country High School athletic coverage.
Yeah, and included in that coverage, you can check out all of our teams. We mentioned the first team today. Go check that out. Check out our second team, third team, and honorable mention. Check out Evan's True Grit team. There are some really great kids on that list that are being honored for what they bring, not just as players, but for what they bring in the toughness department, what they bring as far as reliability, what they bring as far as character. So I love that team because it gives us an opportunity to honor some of those kids that aren't maybe honored for more traditional roles. So check those out. You'll definitely want to do that. And we'd also like to remind you that if you see a photo you like in any one of our galleries, it is available for just $7. You can click on that small shopping cart icon to the bottom right, follow that prompt, and purchase as many of those as you would like. But as you'll notice as you scroll through the site, we take a whole lot of photos here. That's something that we enjoy doing. That's something we're very proud of here at BigCountryPreps.com.
All Big Country, all high school, all the time. Welcome home.